Hey everyone, welcome to Merlin Sports and our NHL preview show. Today we're going to preview the Eastern Conference as the playoff matchups are set. Joining us tonight to break down the Eastern Conference is Ddawg. Ddawg, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, my friend. It's getting into the springtime and NHL hockey's here. It's going to be exciting.
And we definitely have a very interesting first round matchup and some teams making playoffs in the East that we haven't seen in a while. So it should make for some interesting matchup. So let's break down the playoff tree, and then we'll go matchup by matchup and see who we got. And then at the end, we're gonna say who we think is gonna come out of the East. So in Atlantic Division, I mean, we should probably start by saying we're gonna have a new NHL champion this year because the Florida Panthers did not make the playoffs, and in fact, three of the four top teams from last year, Winnipeg, Washington, and Toronto, who finished first, second, and fourth, they didn't make the playoffs at all. So it is, quite a topsy turvy turn this year in the NHL. So we could start at the Atlantic, and the aforementioned Florida Panthers were pretty much guaranteed to make the playoffs the last few years and actually went to three straight Stanley Cup finals, winning the last two. But it was the Buffalo Sabres who won that division, and they secure a first round matchup against the Boston Bruins, and that's an old rivalry resurrected. Tampa Bay finished second and Montreal finishes third in the Atlantic. So there's the first two matchups coming out of that division. The Metropolitan Division, Carolina finishes first once again. They draw the Ottawa Senators as the second wild card. So Carolina had the best record in the East, and they will take on the Ottawa Senators, who are making the playoffs for the second season in a row. And then we have the Battle of Pennsylvania, with Pittsburgh finishing second in that division and Philadelphia finishing third. And we get the Battle of Pennsylvania. Now, those two teams have not made the playoffs in a while, so it's interesting because we get some fresh blood into the East, which makes for I think it has two effects. One is it's good to see some fresh teams in there, and the other thing is that I think it makes it more unpredictable because let's start with let's go back to the Atlantic and let's break down Buffalo Boston, because Buffalo turned into a unit the second half of the season, and they just plowed through, overcame all the top teams in the Atlantic to win the Atlantic. So they draw Boston. Boston didn't make the playoffs last year, and they had a bit of a retool, and here they are again. And Buffalo was just dominant, but they have not made the playoffs in so long. It's really hard. I think this is a hard one to handicap. I'll go first with breaking it down in my prediction. Um, in this, Boston, they played four times in the regular season, and Boston took three out of four from Buffalo. So that's not like Buffalo was dominant over Boston. Um, I think talent wise, I like Buffalo better in terms of being able to roll four lines. I think they have the higher end talent on defense with Rasmus Dahlin, and their defense is quite solid, and they were just a unit down the stretch. The thing that gives me pause for concern for Buffalo is the goaltending. Uh, I'm not particularly too confident with their goaltending. that always seems to come up in the playoffs. If you don't have a solid goaltending, they kind of split between Alex Leon and Luka Lennon. So I don't even know who they would be starting. Who's going to start the first game here? It's kind of bit up in the air. Boston's a little more solidified. We know that Swayman's going to start. Um, they have Pasternak, high end talent, geeky Zaka, pretty solid D, and Charlie McAvoy. So they have some good players. Having said that, even though the goaltending favors Boston and the better goaltending usually wins out, I'm going to predict Buffalo to win this matchup just because I think that they it's it they just were so dominant. I think that carries over for at least one round and gets them through Boston in this first round matchup. What are your thoughts on this series?
Yeah, I mean, you hit a lot of good points with the fact that Buffalo came out of nowhere. They were kind of scraping down the bottom again, another listless season, and then all of a sudden, uh, I guess they found something and started to really come on. I think at one point they won like 10 in a row, and they were just beating teams. And they jumped to quite a number of teams and got up there, and then out of nowhere they surprisingly won the division. And this matchup, you mentioned it, it's an old Adams division battle, right? Boston and Buffalo. I mean, those are long-time rivalries from that year back in those days, and so it's going to be interesting. That I'm sure the hatred is still there from the fandoms. Uh, the problem is when you haven't been in the playoffs for a long time, you lack the experience to come up and be able to thing. I think it's gonna be a very tight checking series. Probably go 7 games where I see Boston eking it out in seven. I just think their experience. The, they got the best player in the series, and David Pasternak. He's a veteran leader. He knows what it takes to win. They got a solid veteran defenseman in Charlie McAvoy. So and you mentioned that goaltending wins, right? And Swayman's been there before. He's brought Boston a pretty long way previously. So he knows what it's like. He knows what it takes to win. He's been solid. I think last year he struggled just for holding out. This year he had a pretty good bounce back year. Leon for Buffalo is out for the first game at least, so that's a blow to them in terms of their goaltending. But I mean, I don't think it's going to be a walk in the park. I think it's going to be a tight series. Buffalo has the advantage overall because they're a better road team and they're very good at home too. But I'll take the experience in this one to get through the first round. I think the experience wins out here.
Hmm. Okay. Well, I think both agreeing on a tight series.
Yep.
That's for sure. Okay, let's move on to the other matchup, which pits second and third in the Atlantic, and that is Tampa Bay and Montreal. And these two teams last met in the COVID year. This was the actual final, the Stanley Cup final that year, which Tampa took that series. Um, so I'll let you start with this one. What are your thoughts on this matchup and another intriguing matchup?
It's interesting because Tampa started off red hot and they were just dominating the Atlantic Division, and somewhere along the lines they kind of stumbled and faded. I think maybe they may have been bored. I mean, they have the experience. They've been through the wars of playoffs before. They got one of the best coaches in the world in John Cooper. So, and their goaltending is solid. I'm not 100% sold on Montreal's goaltending. I know it's been up and down for much of the year, and they themselves at one point they were red hot, and then they fell off. And they. I think. The war of attrition in the Atlantic Division, will help each of the teams that got into the playoffs because there was, they had to get through the Floridas and the Maple Leafs and get them out of the way. Boston's still there, and Tampa's the last of the big standing still. If you look at it, Tampa and Florida really have owned the Eastern Conference for quite a bit of time. I mean, Boston had their moments as well, but Tampa and Florida had owned that sort of part of the Eastern Conference. I like Tampa to win this series. I just think, they have the best player in the series. They have an experienced goaltender who's been through the war. Obviously sometimes health's a factor, but people got to remember Tampa's lost the last couple of years to the Stanley Cup champions. It's like the Leafs. People shit on the Leafs for not getting far, but they lost to the Stanley Cup champions the last couple of years. Right? They lost to Florida. They lost to Tampa. They've lost to Tampa before, but they got through Tampa. They lost to Florida. Right? So they've been through. Tampa's who knows how to win a Stanley Cup. Montreal got in. They got in last year, and they got handled pretty easily by Washington. I'm not gonna say they get handled as easily as they did last year. They might maybe take it to 7, but I like Tampa in 6.
Hmm.
I just think these guys, when they lost to Florida last year, they're like, no. I think they're more on a mission this year. They didn't like that. They didn't like the taste in their mouth, and they'd win for they brought in players last year, let guys go. They let Stamkos go last year, and they brought in Gensel. So I think this year they're more a year together. I think these guys and they're relatively healthy, so I think these guys are. That's where I think these guys are going to the conference finals at least. We'll
Hmm.
see how the other side plays out and if they can get to the championship. But I like Tampa. I like Tampa to win this series.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, this I think will be a pretty great matchup, and I think Tampa took a page out of Florida's book last year in that, man, I think they just took their foot off the gas. They coming out of the Olympic break. I mean, their coach was the coach for Team Canada. They had many players on their roster were spread out. Amongst many of the Olympic teams. So they had that fatigue factor, and I think they just said we're not going to knock ourselves out to get that number 1 seed. We're just going to kind of coast in, conserve, and now you're going to see them lay the pedal down. And I think it's an interesting matchup. You can see they played Montreal. I think earlier in April the 9th, they played Montreal. And if you recall that game, it was there was like several skirmishes and almost outright line brawls in that game. And I think that was Tampa sending a message that says, "Hey," because it looked like they were lining up to be opponents, and Tampa was basically trying to face wash them and intimidate them. And I think that's what you're going to see now. And there's where the experience is going to come in, and they're just going to try to lean on the smaller, more skilled players of Montreal. So now we're going to see if Montreal's style, how it's going to translate against a team that's going to basically, they're going to probably mimic how Florida's been successful the last few years. Just a big, heavy team is just going to lean on the other team, try to nullify their skill, their speed, and their talent. And I'm like you, Montreal. They had some their goaltending looked better down the stretch than it was earlier in the year. Um, but they're completely unproven going into the playoffs. This young goaltending tandem. I think Montebaum is. I don't even think he's the third goalie now. So they basically have Dobis and then the rookie Fowler. Montreal's still a good story. Like, you know, they exceeded expectations. They're pretty exciting team to watch. Like I'll admit, like Montreal is a pretty good team to watch down the stretch. Entertaining, they score a lot of goals. But I think that Tampa's just gonna go kick it into playoff style, where it's more clutch and grab, and you don't have as much room in the ice. And I think
Yep.
Tampa is gonna play that tune, and Montreal, I think, is going to have a hard time. I still think it'll, Montreal will. It's going to be a difficult series, and but I see Tampa just pulling that one out because they're like a wily old dog that's going to find a way to win, and I think they learned a lot from their battles with Florida on what's successful in the playoffs, and not to mention like they're solid uh, goaltending, defense, and offense. So and one of the best head coaches in the game. So, but it will be very entertaining to watch. So we're both on Tampa. Let's move to the Metropolitan, and yes, we'll start with the number one seed Carolina, and they draw the second wild card, which actually comes from the Atlantic. Both wild cards came out of the Atlantic, and that's Ottawa. So Carolina, once again, a strong regular season team, and they, which has been the story for several years now, and they're usually good to get out of the first round, and they always seem to sputter out as the rounds get tighter. But I think in this round, I think Ottawa's a dangerous team. The thing about those last couple of wildcard teams is they've had to play playoff hockey for basically the last month to make the playoffs. I think Carolina has more depth. I'm not so sure on the goaltending. I know they have Brandon Busey and Bussy, however you pronounce his name, and just like Carolina teams, I mean, like they're all their numbers are outstanding in terms of goals against average and goals, and but they just seem to sputter out when it matters most. Ottawa, I think they get some of their injured players. They've returned to the lineup down the stretch, and I think that they'll be a dangerous opponent. And getting into the playoffs last year after a long absence, similar to Montreal, that's valuable. Even though they lost in the first round, it's still valuable experience for a young team. But I just think that Carolina will be too much for them. They just have too much depth and a solid defense to sort of mask any goaltending issues for it to at least get them out of this round. So I like Carolina to come out on top in this series. What are your thoughts on this particular series?
No, I agree with you. I think Carolina's going to win this series. I was just actually um li- listening to TSN talk about it, and they really are high on Ottawa. They say Ottawa is kind of um come along late in the season to get into the playoffs. Was they were all bunched up. Ottawa, Detroit, Boston, and Buffalo kind of pulled ahead, and Montreal pulled ahead. But there was a battle for a while with about four or five teams, and Ottawa came out, and Detroit kind of fell off along with Toronto and Florida. But at the end of the day, I see Carolina as a team that um, they're sort of like Tampa in a way because they've been there, and they've made strides the last couple seasons. So last year they got to the conference finals. They lost to the Stanley Cup champion, the Florida Panthers. The year before that, I mean, for all intents and purposes, besides Shesterkin, they beat the New York Rangers. Shesterkin stole that series from them. So they've been building towards trying to get to the championship. And they got one of the better coaches in the league too. Rod Brindamore is a fantastic hockey coach. He's been around. He's played the game. They brought in guys to this year. They didn't. Last year I think. what happened at the end of last year in trade deadline, where they traded for Mikko Rantanen. Rantanen gets there. He doesn't want to sign there. They ended up trading him away again, right? And back to Dallas. And I think that kind of hurt their team because they had to upend their team twice. It's one thing to bring in a guy and get him assimilated and then thing, but they still got to the conference finals last year. This year, over the summer, they brought in Nicholas Ehlers, right? So that's going to help them as they go along in the playoffs. He had a great run with the Winnipeg Jets, and then he went to Carolina. So you're right that Carolina has some iffy goaltending, regardless of Boosie. He had a great year, and his record was fantastic, but he had an under 90 save, 900 save percentage. That's not good goaltending, right? So, but Carolina, they send pucks to the net. They're they're not necessarily a heavy team, but they can play a little heavy. They grind you. They work hard. They work hard. They press you. They press you, which is what they did to the Rangers and Shesterkin. So, in order for Ottawa to win this series, their goaltender's gonna have to stand on their head. Obviously, the Senators have the X factor, and that's Brady Tkachuk. Not that he's a very good player, but he's just a pest. He's annoying, right? Like his brother. They're just pests, right? But they're good leaders, but they're just pests. So they have that going for them. But I like Carolina. I think Carolina had to get through the regular season, sort of like Tampa, in terms of they got ahead and they just had to get to the regular season. I think Colorado suffered from that second half as well, just getting through the end of the regular season. So, but I like Carolina win this series, and I think they can go on a deep run in the playoffs.
Hmm. Okay, so we're both on Carolina. Well, this brings us to the last matchup in the East, which pits the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Philadelphia Flyers. So Pittsburgh will have home ice in the Battle of Pennsylvania, and two teams that it's been a while since they made the playoffs. Um, this matchup is intriguing. I think this is a difficult matchup to predict. Pittsburgh has been more steady all year, and what impressed me with Pittsburgh was even when Sidney Crosby was injured, getting injured at the Olympics, and he was out of the lineup for weeks. Pittsburgh still maintained. That was what surprised me was they were still able to maintain their level of play and their position in the standings while Crosby was out. Philly, on the other hand, I think they were a little bit more up and down, and it took a late surge in the season, late in the season to make the playoffs. So, but which means they're pretty red hot right now going in. So, um, as with any state rivalry, this will be intense. I can't even recall the last time these two teams met, but this is will be interesting. I'm looking at the season series. They split these teams split the season series 2 games apiece. Uh, they finished identical 98 points. Um, so they're pretty evenly matched. Philly has a +7 goal differential. Pittsburgh has a +25. So I think that you could put that down to Pittsburgh having the better goaltending. Which is kind of hard to say because they traded for Stuart Skinner. They flipped goalies with Edmonton. And Stuart Skinner, although he's had his struggles at times in Edmonton, I mean, you can't dispute he's made 2 straight Stanley Cup finals. And he actually hasn't looked too bad in Pittsburgh. And then, of course, the ageless Sidney Crosby, right? Like, what? Not we don't know how many more chances he's going to get in the playoffs. approaching, the twilight of his career, and Pittsburgh has a lot of like they got a lot of depth with Rust and Mantha and Malkin, Raquel. Like their roster is pretty good. Eric Carlson, having a pretty good year on defense, and they're supplemented with like a lot of young players as well. And of course, Letang is still there, so you still have like the veteran trio of Crosby, Malkin, and Letang, and you throw Carlson in there, so there are four um, players with a lot of experience and interspersed with a lot of youth there. Philly, I'm glad that Philly had a late surge to make the playoffs. So it's been a while since they've been in. They're they got pretty good goaltending from Vladar, who they had to have good goaltending to creep into the playoffs. They got some pretty good players. Konecki, of course, that Trevor Zegras trade that they made with Anaheim. Michkov, the Russian rookie. Well, last year was a dynamic rookie. He had a little bit of a sophomore slump, but still hit the 20 goal mark. So this will be a tough matchup. I'm gonna call Pittsburgh taking this matchup just because they have those veterans that I mentioned that have been there before. Of course, that trio that I mentioned were, they all won the Stanley Cup in Pittsburgh before, so they know what it takes. They've tasted success, so I think they'll be ready. But I would not be surprised if Philly wins, but I'm going to say that Pittsburgh comes out on top in this matchup. What do
Yeah, I
you
mean,
say?
yeah, I mean, you're basically taking probably this is probably one of the last runs Sidney Crosby's going to have. There was a lot of talk before the season. Hopefully, they can get Sid one more run at a Stanley Cup, and so maybe this is it, the last run. Malkin and him have not so much Sid. I mean, he played in 68 games this year, in large part due to that injury in the Olympics. But he still had a solid year. If you round up it for a full 82, he would have had 89 points this year for a 38-year-old. It's pretty damn good. So and this last, uh, obviously, I think for Pittsburgh, they have the experience, and it's not just experience; they have like high end talent experience with Malkin and Crosby, Carlson, Letang. Those guys have been there and done that for a long time in this league. The I think their biggest concern is goaltending, and Stuart Skinner has proven that he's capable of leading a team to the Stanley Cup Finals because he's done it the last 2 seasons. He did have some help both seasons. He had to take a break before coming back, but he hasn't been their better goaltender this year. And so, is he going to get the nod, or are they going all in on one of their other goalies, one of their younger goalies, right? That's kind of going to be the question. I mean, obviously, you'd probably want to start Skinner, but Silovis, I think it's his name. I mean,
Silovs. I think he's
Silovs,
Latvian. Yeah.
Silovs, yeah. So he's played the most games. He had a pretty decent record. His goals against average is a little high at 307. None of these guys, surprisingly, the only guy who had an over 900 save percentage was the guy that traded away Tristan Jarry. And if you look at that trade was for Edmonton to get a goalie, which tells you where Pittsburgh was looking in their future. They weren't looking at making the playoffs this year, so this is a nice bonus for them, for Sid to get in there. I don't think Sid wants to go out in a whimper and lose in the first round, so I'm on it. I'm on that the Pittsburgh with you, even though I think it's really suspect their goaltending, and I think Philly has a significant edge in goaltending. but you never know. You don't know how people react in the playoffs for the first time, and starts and play really well. And they get hot and all of a sudden, right? People didn't know about Matt Murray until he got into the playoffs and he got hot and they won a Stanley Cup, right?
Mm-hmm. Jordan
Uh,
Billington from a
yeah,
few
it,
years back.
yeah. So, um, you know, maybe he ratchets up his temperature in the playoffs, and they still loves and they have a good run. I'll take Pittsburgh, but I think it's a tight series, and I think it goes 7.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's much separating these two teams.
Okay. Okay, well, that covers all the series. Now, who you got coming out of the East?
Um, I'm gonna say Tampa.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think we are gonna have the same team.
yeah, yeah. I think Tampa and Carolina will meet in the conference finals, but these Florida teams don't want to give up the Stanley Cup. So I will. I think Tampa. I see Tampa coming out of the East.
Hmm. I also have Tampa coming out of the East. I just think that they're just the playoff pedigree. And plus, they traded for Corey Perry during the stretch. So Corey Perry is how many Stanley Cup Finals has he made in the last 6 or 7 years? Right? I think he's just missed one Stanley Cup Final in the last 6 seasons, something insane
He,
like that.
I,
But
I didn't realize they got him back. I mean, he's been around so long, but he bounces around, and you're right. He has a knack for getting his team to the Stanley Cup.
yeah, but all kidding aside, I just think Tampa. I think they are the class of the East and they're the most battle tested, playoff hardened team with the best coach, and I think they kind of played possum a little bit down the stretch here, a la Florida last year. So we both have Tampa coming out. That's interesting. Okay. Now before we end this show, we wanted to honor the great Joe Bowen, of course, the commentator for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and concluding his career, 44-year career, started in 1982. And he's a for those that not familiar with Joe Bowen, I mean, he's been basically the heart and soul of the Toronto Maple Leaf broadcasts. Similar to Rick Jeanneret and Doc Emmerich, other legends of broadcasting that have retired in recent years. It's Joe Bowen since 1982, and think about how much hardship he would have encountered calling Leaf games, and how passionate he was for even regular season games. And it's just a shame that he did not get to call a Stanley Cup final game with Toronto. But we're gonna play. We're gonna play a montage here of his clip, so we can just sit and listen for a couple of minutes. So here we go.
Lefebvre gets an uppercut. Down goes Brown. Here's Clark down the boards to Gilmore. Gilmore to Bobby Rose. Shot. Scores! Nikolai Borashevsky has scored for Toronto. The Leafs win. The Leafs win. As in comes Hextall to grab Potvin. Now Potvin and Hextall are fighting. Off comes Potvin's helmet. Hextall throwing punches at Potvin. Felix throwing an uppercut, lands on Hextall right on the button. They're wailing away at one another. Hextall sweaters off. That's a fine. Here's another throwing punch. Hextall with an uppercut. Felix throwing rights and left. The pileup is underneath, but the main event is the goaltender. And out comes Barrison with one man back. Barrison with Thomas. Thomas scores! Stevie Thomas! The game is over! Holy mackerel! Steve Thomas scores the winner in overtime! Again, now winds and fires. Rebound in front, Moranis! Holy mackerel! What a save by Curtis Joseph! Lying on his back, he elevates his pad and kicks it away.
Okay, we're back. So, like, what's your final thoughts on Joe Bowen?
I just want to say thank you, Joe. I mean, growing up, growing up in Brampton, Ontario, as I did, as we both did, and we didn't have the streaming and all the channels that we have nowadays, where we can watch hockey anytime we want. It's on every game. It's every game's on every night, and you're watching a game. We had to sit beside a radio and turn it on, and we'd find the old AM dial, 1430 the fan, and then they moved to 590, but CJCL originally 1430, and we'd listen to Joe Bowen, Jim Ralph, Bill Waters. It just the way Joe described the game, you felt you were at the game. You bought into it. You're on your edge of the seat because he made it so exciting, and it's just disappointing that he was never able to call a Stanley Cup, and it's disappointing the Leafs kind of flatlined this year and dropped out of the playoffs, because at least he could have at least had one more run, Stanley Cup playoffs. But thank you, Joe, for everything in terms of what you've brought a lot of fans to the Toronto Maple Leafs just by your calls and where you were, and you're a legend, and we're gonna miss listening to the games with you on it. It's just I just can't think it's gonna be the same anymore, man.
Yeah, 100%. And I know I'm not the only one, and you're not the only one who, at times, muted the TV broadcast audio and put on the radio just to hear Joe. That
Yeah,
like because he was that good. Um, so yeah. Thanks, Joe. We tip our hat here at Merlin Sports to Joe Bowen. So hell of a career, Joe. And
thank you
with
very
that,
much.
yeah. And with that, that concludes the NHL East preview. Stay tuned for our NHL West preview show coming up soon. All right, thanks everyone. Thanks, D-Dub.
Take care, man.